This is Jonathan Ferguson, the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. And on this episode, Jonathan is taking a look at the World War I era weaponry of Isonzo.
Villar Perosa, as it's nearly universally named. As beautifully modelled as this is, I did immediately spot something, which is that, again, you can't just rip out magazines. If you can, you've failed as a magazine designer or as a gun designer.
If there are any other games, guns, and mechanics that you guys want to see Jonathan break down, let us know in the comment section below. And if you'd like to help out the Royal Armouries Museum and continue to support Jonathan's work, check out the links in the description of this video. Right, over to Jonathan.
The Steyr M1912 or Hahn. Distinctive for, well, the clip loading guide on the top, the big blocky rear sight, and that sort of barrel key disassembly system at the front, which is reminiscent of sort of old sporting muzzle loaders and things. It looks like everything is pretty much as it ought to be. There are a few variations in these over the years. The markings do vary. The big thing about the Steyr Hahn is no detachable magazine. This is a sort of last gasp of the load it from the top, broom handle Mauser style. Hence it will always lock open. You can load it the way that we saw initially. If you attempt to insert a single round, as we saw there, where a round is dropped in, loose, and then pressure is applied with the thumb. If you do that, you'll end up with Steyr thumb, unless you first put on that latch. That will manually hold the slide to the rear. You can then push rounds in one at a time, because the only sort of feed lip that's holding them in after you let go is essentially, well, it's connected to this release latch. So you can load it singly. By far the most efficient way to load it is the second method, with, well, you strip off a full clip. Either way, you would then press down on the slide release, and the weapon is then chambered. You can then put it on safe and carry it around. To do that, you actually have to pull back on the hammer and push up. So there may be a couple of details of the sort of manual of arms that are not modelled in the game, or just not seen because it's not necessary. I don't think we're using the safeties, so not really a problem. Well, I mean, that is a problem, but it's not a problem in the game. What we seem to have here is a weapon for firing fence posts. I know nothing of this system, I must admit. I'm guessing it's an improvised or semi-improvised trench mortar. It's a spigot mortar in technical terms, that much I can tell. We've got a wing nut for adjusting elevation and some sort of pipe bomb type munition with a fairly hilarious, not hilarious if you're having to fight in the First World War, but nonetheless, fuse hanging down at the rear, which we are lighting with a sort of with a cigarette lighter, I think. All, I'm sure, faithful to the original, if not something that we have here. The one thing I possibly can criticise is that bit of fuse, because it doesn't seem to burn down. I could be missing something here, I don't know the system, but just touching a flame to the end of that bit of string wouldn't seem to be sufficient to ignite it. If it's fused, it ought to burn down before firing. If it's actually a lanyard that you're supposed to pull, well then you shouldn't be setting light to it. So I'm sure I'm missing something there. Right, next up, the Madsen. This is a hugely important gun historically, used by dozens of nations. Now, I am not very familiar with this particular theatre and period of history. The Madsen absolutely fits chronologically, technologically, tactically. Not sure that we have hard evidence of either side using it, or at least I haven't seen it just in cursory online research. I'd be very surprised if there isn't some evidence for the Austro-Hungarian Empire using it, and hence why it's been included in this game. I'm just saying, I can't really confirm or deny the extent to which either side used it. The thing that jumps out to me is the ripping the magazine out without operating the magazine catch. I haven't got one to hand, but I don't think that would work. It has a Bren style magazine catch, and what may have thrown them off here is that skilled users will use the heel of the hand to activate the magazine as they come in and rock the magazine out. Everything else looks good. Rate of fire sounds right. You've got the crank style cocking handle, and being able to run around with it like, you know, as a sort of assault machine gun, as it were. Yeah, it's light enough and handleable enough that you can do that. Okay, really interesting machine gun, the Revelli Model 1914, often called the Fiat Revelli because the Fiat company, famous Fiat company, made them. I have just grabbed the aircraft gun version. So the back half is as you see in the ground gun, because it's the same gun. So we've got the receiver extension out the back, which is essentially empty space, and is really just to give you enough clearance for this wacky horned bolt to come out to the rear. So the other weird thing about this gun is this crazy feed block cage, whatever you call it. It's essentially a row of sort of pistol magazines with their independent springs and followers, and we've got some inert rounds on this block to show you roughly how it works. So it comes in from the left side, just as you see in the game, and that's what it looks like. So you'd have a carrying kit with several of these in, and they're firing in sequence, and then the gun advances it to the next spot, and then the next string. So it's like semi-full automatic in a way. Now, something I noticed in the game, I'm not super familiar with these, so I could be missing something, but I have not found a bolt hold open on this. Pulling the bolt all the way to the rear, and it's staying there for loading, I haven't seen that. I have not looked at the rate of fire on the Revelli, I must admit. This seems maybe a bit high, and it almost seems like the bolt is outrunning the feed device, if that makes sense. So when a short burst is fired, the bolt comes back twice, 2 cases come out, the block doesn't move, but then firing continuous strings, the bolt doesn't seem to be reciprocating enough times to have fired a complete row of cartridges. That maybe it's me, but maybe it's not quite synced up as it ought to be. Quite a quirky gun, and it's nice to see it in a game for what has to be the first time. The Steyr M95 infantry rifle. I am looking here at a sort of overhead pass on this beautifully modelled virtual M95. Very impressed with it. Ours is actually in better condition than the one in the game. I'm not going to say that's a criticism at all, because it's amazing how quickly infantry weapons can look old. It's more about the service they've seen, where they've seen it, in what sort of usage, and it's incredible how they can quickly look like military surplus in actual use. But it really does look good. Alright, we've got a sniper variant as well. I like the slight fisheye effect of the optics. I wonder if that's strictly accurate. All of the late 19th century optics I've looked through have been pretty optically correct. Maybe the scope that they used for reference had that effect. Maybe they all do in this case, I don't know. But typically, by the late 19th century, the Victorians knew optics. They could grind flat optics just as well, just with more time and cost, pretty much as we do today. So don't know if that distortion is actually fair, as it were. I did notice that the player is finger and thumbing the bolt, which is easily doable when the cocking piece is back, when it's going to cock. It's a little awkward to do in the way depicted, but not impossible by any means when you've got the spring pressure to overcome. I would expect more of a grip like this, so using the meat of the hand, finger and thumb, but support of the hand, and much easier and more repeatable, especially when you've got cartridges in the weapon that are going to induce extra friction, extra drag. The most important thing for me, if I was advising on something like this, is find some manuals and try to replicate that. Because even if people deviated in actual combat, at least you've got a frame of reference, and you can say to anyone that criticises, here's where we got the source. We've got a revolver here, a sidearm, but it's looking good to me. We do have a number of these in the collection. The Rast Gasser, so another very end of the 19th century design. Not too unusual, but it has that slightly kludgy, clunky late 19th century revolver design where we haven't quite settled on the most efficient way to do a double action revolver. Speaking of double action, it's a bit jaunty in its firing animation. I think they're trying to get across the physical difficulty of pulling through on what is actually quite a strong double action trigger pull on these, and hence we're almost snatching the shots So that's just something I noticed. It definitely is an issue. You cannot keep the sights bang on target when you're yanking through on a double action trigger pull. Looking at the close detail of this, those cartridges, they have very dark primers. I guess that's modelled off a real one that's maybe aged or something, or perhaps there was a lacquer on the primer on these, I don't know. Good reload though. We've got the ejector rod on the side being used to knock out a round, and then replacing it with a live, rotate the cylinder, rinse and repeat until you've replaced all of your fired cartridges. Right, first reaction. Wow, that's really detailed. We've got a Beretta 1915 self-loading pistol. That's in, as it says on the slide, 9mm, and it is, yes, 9M, not 9mm on this pistol. Because I have one here. Now, this is our nicest example, but it has been, I think, refinished in service because the text is actually a bit blurry. So if you can't see that on camera, it does in fact say exactly what this says on the side. My one nitpick is, and my first impression was, that looks a bit Resident Evil. It looks like the text on a Resident Evil gun. And that's because the font isn't right. So the font is a font with serifs, the little hooks and bumps on the corners of the letters. Whereas it's just block capitals on the real gun. The actual text, the way it's presented, is great, and it shows a level of attention to detail. The problem is, the more details you get, the more little branching tiny details, micro details, you can fall into the trap of. So that's why I'm harping on about that. Okay, handling wise, good. We've got one-handed operation. Typically at this time, pistol shooters would adopt a bent elbow, bent wrist grip. A little bit of a raised eyebrow on the overhand slide operation. That's a very recent development. Then again, I don't know First World War Italian training pamphlets. Maybe they did, but I'd be very surprised. The sort of received wisdom on cocking a self-loading pistol with a slide by this time was turn it to one side, grasp the serrations, pull to the rear, and release. I'd be pretty surprised if anyone's Magpul power stroking their Beretta 1915. But of course, people are free to deviate from training. That's excellent. We have a hold open system on this, as we're used to on self-loading pistols. Holds open on the empty magazine, you know you're empty. Great, so we're used to that. The quirk with this Beretta, is as depicted. So when you pull out the magazine, it's the magazine that's holding open, or magazine follower that's holding open the slide. There's the follower's not operating a hold open device. The follower is the hold open device, meaning a lot of effort required to pull out that magazine, and when you do, the slide goes forward, which means all this is an empty weapon indicator. It's not a convenience for reloading, because you insert your fresh magazine, you're going to have to fully operate the slide again, so they've got it absolutely right. Alright, now this is a bit of vintage kit by even First World War standards. This example from our collection is basically identical to the one in front of me. It has a bit of extra history to it. So this is the Vetterli-Vitali, so this is prior generation Italian service rifle. I assume it was used by reserve troops in the First World War. Well, it was used by reserve troops in the First World War. I assume they're meant to be present in the game, hence the presence of this vintage rifle. A really nicely modelled gun again, and here any wear and tear is absolutely expected because these things have been knocking around for decades by this point, so it would look a bit antique. You can see the very interesting clip system there. We have got one. I don't have handy, unfortunately. Cardboard and steel with a toggle on the top for pulling out the cartridge, because it's not a Mannlicher style on-block clip that stays in the gun. It is a stripper clip, but it's this slightly wacky way of doing it. Like, shove it in, pull it down. The rounds are pretty huge. This is as befits a rifle of this era, it's on the 10-11mm order, 10.4mm caliber to be precise. So it's a big old heavy slow bullet by First World War standards. So we have a bayoneting. We have Vetterli bayonets. They're big, brutal sword bayonet. I mean, all bayonets are brutal, but a little bit indistinct there. It's kind of thrust in the direction of the enemy. Enemy falls down. There's a bit of red. That's not really a criticism. Every game does bayoneting like that. You don't really get that visceral sense that you are stabbing somebody with a knife on a stick. Obviously, the more realistic you make that, the more disgusted people might be by it. I don't know. I don't know if it's a technical limitation or a sort of ethical one, or a bit of both. But no game really does bayoneting very accurately. Maybe we don't want them to. Alright then, the Villar Perosa, as it's nearly universally named. As beautifully modelled as this is, I did immediately spot something, I'm sorry to say, which is that, again, you can't just rip out magazines. If you can, you've failed as a magazine designer or as a gun designer. And the Villar Perosa has these slightly dodgy looking magazine catches at the front. You could effectively rip them out, but you'd have to use your little finger to actuate the magazine release as you then rip them out. And you do have to angle the mag quite far back before it will clear the lug. So they have to come out at sort of this angle. So sort of pulling them straight out of the top of the gun, as we seem to see here, not so much. But the actual modelling of the gun is really good. All the components and everything look to be done correctly. When off the bipod, and this does make some sense, only the right-hand trigger is being pressed. Holding it like a sort of submachine gun. If you're having to hold it like this, you can't easily fire both. What you could, of course, do is fire one, reach over, fire two, rather than just reloading the right-hand side. But hey, using the gun in a way it's not supposed to be used, you would make up whatever system of operation you deem appropriate. I think there is an unintended consequence, slight cock-up with the way this is set up in the game to fire only one side when you're carrying it handheld, and that is when you do a reload, you've still got your unspent magazine on the left-hand side. On the real gun, when you cock it, only one cocking handle moves. They are literally independent guns. They're not connected. In the game, when you cock it, it cocks both, which would mean ejecting a live round every time you reload your right-hand side of the gun. And that isn't modelled and wouldn't be correct. Right, first impressions on this, the M91 Carcano Cavalry carbine. This looks great. We've got some really nicely done wood on here, and it almost looks like it isn't just a texture. The edges look genuinely kind of, I guess friable would be the word, where they've been abraded over time. We've got the notching out of the handguard on top, which is to accommodate the flip forward battle sight, or rather the adjustable sight flips forward, revealing the battle sight underneath. And what's really impressed me here are the fingerprints. Those are, I think, are probably meant to be oily fingerprints. They do look like someone's left a thin coat of oil on their weapon, as they probably should, and then they've grasped it with a thumb and it's left a print. It adds a level of sort of detail that I hadn't even considered, the idea of putting fingerprints on guns. Okay, so we've got our view down the iron sights here. Now, bearing in mind this is a slightly out of period scale replica of the real thing, but correctly modelled. We can see our rear sight there, and it's correctly modelled with, no doubt, a separately modelled folding adjustable aperture. Now, from what I've read of how the sights work with Italian rifles, you're actually supposed to use them more like buckhorn sights on something like a Winchester. In other words, you would put the tip of the front sight in the bottom of the V for a given range, which gives you a different sight picture than what we see here, because what the guys have done here is what you'd expect 99% firearms do, and that's to put the front sight level with the rear sight. That's in all the marksmanship lessons that have ever been taught in history, probably, but in this case is probably slightly wrong. The way the clip loading system is shown is correct. I don't know if this is modelled, but there is a way to eject the clip. So we have here a full-length M91 Carcano. This one's beautifully sectioned, so we can see how it works. So it works essentially like a Garand. Insert your clip, against spring tension until that latch can click into place. That's then in place, ready for the bolt head to pick up the first round. So I don't know if it's modelled in the game. This was a bugbear of M1 Garand representation in games, was that you had to fire off all your shots before you could reload the thing. It's not in the game yet. I suspect they will add it, but it is possible on the Carcano. Just like there's a clip eject on the Garand, and you can even pop it part way out and top it off. In this case, it's that latch. Push forward on that. I'm just going to help it because it's a section 1, but push forward on that latch, and then that sprung lifter will, with some force, eject your partial clip. So if you're trying to just take it out partially empty, you would need to grab hold of it. So it's a bit of a three-handed job, but it is possible to reload a partial clip to top off the rifle. So we've got an M91 rifle set up for rifle grenade shooting, and nicely we've got our grenade propelling cartridge being inserted straight into the chamber, so not using the clip, which I assume is how it's done for real. And the way it launches off the end looks pretty good to me. There's maybe not enough recoil modelled, because launching a couple of pounds of iron and explosive off the end of your gun really takes a toll on the gun and on you. And typically rifle grenades were not fired from the shoulder. Maybe these were, but it would be not fun. Typically they were fired with the butt in the ground. I'll have to go in and look into that a bit more, but looking good. Right, so something new and, well, not entirely new, I suppose. We've had artillery represented in games and in First World War games before. But I think we're getting a lot more detail and a lot more realism in the way that this is shown to operate. We can actually see what's happening with the breech, the recoil, that the actual gun barrel is recoiling in the carriage. Although this is only a 7.5 centimeter mountain gun, so a relatively small artillery piece, I'd still expect to see it rocking back on the wheels slightly. Like even if this has a super efficient recoil system for its caliber and a locking system for the wheels and the trail is properly dug in and everything. I am not an artillery specialist, by the way, despite my job title. I'm responsible for artillery at the Royal Armouries, but I would expect it to at least move slightly on those wheels. But other than that, it looks great. The only thing we're missing here is a sighting system. So we've got our reticle that's got a sort of modern grenade launcher range stadia on it. Obviously, you don't see that in front of your eyes in real life. You'd need some sort of sighting system, and what we're really missing here is the sense of a crew. In reality, it's a team of several guys who all know their jobs incredibly well and work as a synchronized team to lay the gun, operate the gun, reset the gun, and there are so many tasks involved in crewing a separate job in every armed force for a reason. Thanks for watching. That was a bit of a marathon through the very splendidly done guns of Isonzo. Please do, if you can, come and visit us at one of the 3 UK sites of the Royal Armouries. If you can't, you can go and check out our YouTube channel and our various social media outlets, and of course continue to watch this series, which will be back next week.